Hi folks, this is lesson 1.3, focusing on the relationship between sociology and science. If you will note on page 10 of the first study guide, I've highlighted the fact that there are a variety of approaches or research orientations in sociology. Most sociologists are going to embrace the first one, the scientific. The scientific method, as applied to sociology as well as to any other investigation, is focused on asking questions and gathering information, searching for insights. In the case of sociology, insights into human social interaction and the makeup as well as the operation of society. Science, bear in mind, is but one of a number of sources of information that we humans have employed during our time on the planet. If you will focus on page 3 of your first study guide, I've highlighted several of these key sources of knowledge that human beings have employed. I want to draw attention particularly to common sense, because some people have told me that sociology is nothing more than the study of the obvious, common sense. And the sociologists are the ones who put everything that everybody knows or is supposed to know in terms or in phrases, the result being everybody's confused. Well, in fact, sociological research often debunks a lot of common sense assumptions. You might pay attention particularly on page 3 to the information I've highlighted here about common sense. Bear in mind that no one is born with common sense knowledge. It's something that is learned. Furthermore, most scientific analysis of common sense proves them to be false because almost all common sense assumptions have never really been verified. That is to say, scientifically tested. They're just taken at face value. They have to be correct because this is what everybody knows to be true. Likewise, you want to remember that common sense assumptions are relative. They're going to vary over place and time. For example, it's pretty safe to assume that most contemporary North Americans would regard a child born with both male and female genitalia with real concern and apprehension. That child's parents would most likely agree to have their child undergo surgery to correct what they would consider to be an abnormality. That's just common sense. Yet the Pukot people of East Africa don't consider this condition to be abnormal. The traditional Navajo of the American Southwest view such children with wonder and awe and treat them as gifted leaders. And then last but not least, common sense assumptions often contradict one another. Best way to illustrate this is to think about common sense phrases you've heard your whole life. You ever heard this one? You're never too old to learn. Yet, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Look before you leap. But we're also told he or she who hesitates is lost. Three's a crowd, yet the more the merrier. Or maybe this one, there's no place like home, but the grass is supposed to be greener on the other side of the fence or the hill. My father, often following an argument with my mother, would sometimes tell me women are unpredictable. Yet, following another discussion or argument with my mother later in the day, he would walk away mumbling, "Isn't that just like a woman?" Science is really a method of study used to evaluate information gained through what is called systematic observations. There's a system, there's a scheme, there is a approach that sociologists use. The scientific method is concerned with seeking regularities and patterns that exist within the natural and social world. There's an order out there, if you will. The social sciences, including sociology, that use the scientific method are concerned with identifying these regularities and patterns. That's scientific research. and then trying to explain them. The scientific method is marked by several key characteristics. I hope you will bear these in mind. First and foremost, knowledge is acquired via or through observation. Scientists seek what's called empirical evidence. Jargon alert. What's that mean? Well, that which can be observed or documented employing the human senses. Empirical evidence consists of two general types, quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is number-based, and it's usually presented in the form of variables. There's information on the first study guide as to variables. Just think of them as factors which change from one situation or person to another. For example, social class and enrollment in a college or university. Variables are often classified as independent or dependent. Independent variables are the cause of a relationship. Dependent variables are assumed to be caused by the independent variable or variables. Check this out on page 4 of Study Guide 1. In the example I used earlier, social class is the independent variable. It's associated with the likelihood of attending college. On the other hand, attending college is the dependent variable. Those attending are more likely to come from middle and upper social class families. So, again, cause and effect. A correlation is a relationship in which a change in one variable is linked to a change in another variable. Now, that doesn't mean a correlation always implies cause. In the example I used, social class is correlated with college attendance, but social class doesn't cause college attendance. Rather, social class membership is associated with a variety of factors that can influence the likelihood of attending college. Put it another way, being a member of a middle or an upper class family basically suggests you're more likely going to be able to afford college costs. Quantitative research begins with the formation, or if you wish, the creation of a hypothesis, an educated guess, a statement designed to predict the relationship between or among variables in the data that has been collected. Check again, page 4, Study Guide 1. Now, qualitative empirical evidence is non-number based. It's collected from direct observations, written or viewed documents, interviews. Sociologists who employ qualitative data usually are concerned with describing and analyzing social processes. They often organize or focus their evidence around key notions that have been developed through their research, and they're going to employ or use interviews and direct observations to highlight or illustrate key points. One of the primary means of generating qualitative data is through the research method that is highlighted on page 5 of your first study guide, participant observation. Henslin highlights an example, a sociologist who might be interested in learning how spouse abuse affects wives. The sociologist, therefore, might seek to observe spouse abuse victims from the time they report their attacks to officials at a crisis intervention center through their participation in counseling. The sociologist might try to establish good rapport with the victims so that they can be able to spend time with them in settings other than the intervention center or the counseling center, observing additional aspects of the victims' lives. Their statements and how they interact with others might help the sociologist to better understand how abuse has affected the victim. Participant observation and the examination of existing resources can really help researchers understand how people experience the social world, how they interpret, make sense of their own experiences, And this is something that researchers who are crunching numbers may have real difficulty doing. Now, at the same time, another key characteristic of science is the fact that the accuracy of the knowledge gained is confirmed through verification or testing. Now, not everything in science can be tested. For example, we can't verify or test that the sun, spelled S-U-N, is a god. That's a matter of faith. But on the other hand, could we verify or test the sun is a major source of heat and energy? Yes. Third and finally, there is a specific research model or process. Hensland highlights this in the form of a circle. And it's addressed as well in your study guide on page 4. And I hope that you will spend some time looking through and over it. Don't worry about memorizing all of these steps or processes. Just remember there's a system, and it works in a circular-like fashion. But one thing I would like for you to concentrate on, to study in some detail, is the fact that science, as a method of inquiry, is marked by several key characteristics. Pay attention to page 4 in your first study guide. Go over each one of these. Critical thinking, organized skepticism, verifiable evidence, objectivity, conclusions that are relative and subject to change, and finally, sharing of findings and methodology. It's important that you remember that all scientists make choices about what they will study based upon their values and their personal interest. That directly violates number 4. But the ideal or the desired approach is that personal values don't influence the outcome of the study. And that's going to require the researcher to report the means by which he or she arrived at his or her findings. That's number 6, the value of replication. Remember, too, that all scientific disciplines have quality assurance problems. What's interesting about the social sciences, like sociology, is they have an additional problem that the natural sciences don't have, and that's people. Social scientists study subjects that can conceal information, refuse to cooperate, and if they desire to do so, just flat lie. So precision is not the primary requirement or characteristic of science. All of you know some highly respected sciences that aren't very precise. How about meteorology? Plus, remember, a lot in science is problematic. It depends upon the accuracy of the observation, the effectiveness of the measuring instruments, and the state of knowledge at the time. And there are always exceptions to scientific generalizations, and that's what science generates, generalizations. Scientific laws reflect relationships among elements under specific circumstances. Even though they're called laws, they're really in effect ideal type observations. Note gravity. There is a formula for calculating the speed of a falling body in the absence of resistance. But if resistance is encountered, or if the bodies involved have different masses, the so-called law has to be altered. So it isn't the method that, in effect, kind of messes up folks. What you want to remember, the method is the key. This is sometimes, I think, a factor that people tend to get confused about. They want to think science is precision, is precision driven. It's really the method, not the level of accuracy, that characterizes science. Don't overlook the fact, again, that some highly respected sciences aren't very precise when it comes to measurement as well as prediction. Now, in the next lesson, we'll highlight the formation of theory.